We're finally at the conclusion of the Apple TV Plus series Shining Girls. Now, this has been a mind-melting watch, and I've loved all the twists and the turns. But does this finale make it all worth it? Dan has been killed, and as Kirby's reality spirals, she sets her sights on finally tracking down Harper. At the end of episode 7, we saw Harper attack Dan and then kill him in that bar. Now, we also saw that Dan grabbed something from Harper's pocket as he fell to the ground. And because Harper attacked Dan that night instead of Jin Suk, her reality has shifted, but now in a very strange way. This final episode does some things with shifting realities that made me snort with a kind of laughing disbelief, but not in a bad way. I mean, it was more kind of like that, holy crap, this is nuts type of reaction. Kirby's on the trail to find Harper, as she has been, so she has to continue to work the clues if she wants to find him. But Harper feels like he's becoming much more erratic, making his actions less predictable and therefore harder to nail down. Plus, he's still on the search for his missing video of Clara, which he's been trying to locate for quite a bit, so that's not helping his mental state at all. I love the effect on the timeline all of Harper's unpredictable actions are having on the other characters. Now there's a scene with Kirby and Jin Suk that's a little shocking, but also very entertaining because our characters are in such a state of uncertain distress. Elisabeth Moss and Philippa Soo craft some emotionally palpable performances, where I could just feel the unease that they were experiencing. They capture so much in just their eyes that it's unmistakable what they're feeling. And a lot of the time that is confusion and dread. And I love how a bunch of this happens within a very short period of time. There's a succession of scenes that just pile on each other to mess with the whole reality experience in a very compressed then amount of time. So I've said from the very beginning that I really hope this series knows where it's going and that it has a resolution in mind. Well, the series does have a resolution and a conclusion. And because of how this wraps up, though, I'd be very curious at how they'd even manage a second season. But I'm almost getting ahead of myself there. There are so many conveniences built into this episode that it ended up bothering me and affecting my overall feeling about the show. Now, I'm not tossing out the entire thing as terrible, but there are key points within this finale that allow it to wrap up quickly and then fairly easily. Now, once a character discovers this one thing, which does feel like a natural move within the story, events then play out in rapid succession, and those make me scratch my head as to the logic of them and how a certain character would know how to do a certain thing and then use it to their advantage. That is terribly vague, and maybe even confusing, I know. I just don't want to give the spoilers because this episode is still very much worth watching. I just feel that the way we get to the conclusion feels a bit lazy. Like the writers just wanted to wrap up this incredibly convoluted show with just a quick stroke of the pen to make it all come together. And they do that. There are solid resolutions, but it's the manner in which these resolutions come about that I really take issue with. And I can make all the assumptions I want, but certain aspects just aren't shown to us, leaving us to ultimately kind of guess at just how the conclusion works. I also have questions on the logic of the shifting realities. Without getting into spoilers for this episode, when something changed in the past, we saw Kirby's physical attributes change, like, her hair getting shorter or longer. Now, when the conclusion arrives for the show, certain aspects are still around, despite some large changes, and that is something that I just can't wrap my head around. It seems like everything should change, or nothing should. Instead, it feels like the show picks and chooses what changes and what remains static. There's also a knowledge base that needs to come into play with a portion of the finale. And while we don't really ever get a full explanation of it just during the entire show, a character in this finale seems to instantly have information on something that they shouldn't. That also, it just doesn't sit well with my brain. Now, despite these questions that I have about the conveniences of the finale, the pacing is driving, keeping this a very taut and engaging thriller. There are moments that we're allowed to breathe, but then the urgency picks right back up with tension and pressure that was holding my attention. And I really enjoyed some of the quieter moments that we get to spend with Kirby too. There's one in particular where she's trying to track down something and get something that she believes is going to help her find Harper. The sincere emotion that comes in this scene, I thought it was moving, and it helps to showcase why Elisabeth Moss can create such a complex character who's flawed, scared, driven, and determined. Now, I would have liked the story to showcase a couple of the characters more in this episode, and one of them just seems pretty much forgotten. But the focus we get on Kirby, it remains steady and effective for progressing the narrative forward. So overall, this final episode of Shining Girls wasn't as awesome as I had hoped, thanks mostly to the convenient arcs built in to wrap up the story elements. There are portions that feel more rushed within the story, which is odd given how much time we spent throughout the show just building to this climax. I would have preferred another episode to fully flesh out the ideas and concepts for our characters so their actions didn't feel unearned because of skips in logic. The pacing is efficient, giving pauses when necessary, but never losing momentum. But even though this episode wasn't as great as I'd wanted, the show as a whole is very engaging and can hurt the brain in a great way. The acting is absolutely captivating with Elisabeth Moss, Jamie Bell, Wagner Moura, Philippa Sue, and Chris Chalk. They all work extremely well together, creating a narrative that had me hooked right from the very beginning. There's no sex or nudity, but there is profanity and some violence. I give the entire season of Shining Girls 4 out of 5 couches. Who's your favorite character in this series? Now, I really enjoyed Jamie Bell as Harper because he played the damaged and unhinged villain just so convincingly. But let me know yours in the comments below. Also, I think Ruben from the Ruby Tuesday and we are going to be talking spoilers from this season in our podcast, The Best Thing We Watched This Week. So be on the lookout for that if you want to hear a spoiler discussion. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.